Hi everybody, welcome to today's podcast for Azure On Air. We're at the Integrate Summit and today we're joined by Andrei Kamenev, who's part of the API management team at Microsoft. Thank you for joining us, Andrei.
Thanks for having me.
Andrei's joining me and we're going to talk about generative AI and the relationship between that and API management. To start with, Andrei, can you just tell us a bit about your role at Microsoft and what kind of things you're involved in?
Yeah, so I've been at Microsoft for almost 8 years now. I started as what you typically call in the industry is a pre-sales engineer. So I was a cloud solution architect working with customers on Azure, and then I switched over to the engineering team. And now for the last year, a little bit more than a year, I work in Azure API management, covering like different API types like GraphQL, gRPC, kind of the innovation that we were bringing into the product. But lately also like on all of the Gen AI capabilities that we built into the product, which are one is kind of Gen AI gateway capabilities, which are helping customers to build products with Gen AI, with OpenAI models and stuff like that. And the second is the innovation in the Copilot space, where we tackled a couple of problems specific to Azure API management with the Copilot.
Yeah. So if I put myself in a customer's position then, so I'm building a solution that I believe I need Gen AI in it. Tell me why API management could be important in that kind of architecture.
Yeah, so when you start building intelligent applications, that's what we call them, like applications that use sort of large language models. Typically, if you go with Azure OpenAI, like Azure makes it really simple for you to deploy a model, deploy endpoint. You grab your API key, you import the SDK, and you're good to go. But what's important to understand with Azure OpenAI and other LLMs is that there is a main currency that you're using, which is tokens. So tokens represent a kind of a chunk of text that model generates. And also when you send a prompt to a model, it also uses these tokens. And everything in this kind of LLM world uses tokens. So everything is like quotas and limits, everything is expressed in tokens per minute. And that's also something that you're paid for. Like if you're in a pay-as-you-go model, you pay for token usage.
Yeah.
There's another model, for example, with Azure OpenAI service, there is a model where you can pay for reserved capacity, which is called provision throughput units. And you start small, you start with a single application as a customer, you integrate, as I mentioned, you just import API key, you're good to go. But then what if you want to scale? What if you want to add more applications? What if you want to add more OpenAI endpoints, for example? I know you want to have one endpoint for your customers who are located in Canada, another one for customers located in Europe. And now you have different challenges. Because as I mentioned, you pay for tokens, and tokens is the main currency. Now you want to understand how your applications or multiple development teams, how they use those tokens. You want to track usage, to then do cross charges, to understand the kind of the consumption of those tokens. That's one thing. Second thing is you want to limit those applications. You want to apply some sort of rate limiting to those because, as I mentioned, on the model level, on the on the Azure OpenAI level, you have these tokens per minute, which means that application A can consume the whole quota, and that means that for application B, there is no tokens left.
Yeah.
And that breaks the customer experience, the user experience for those applications. So you want to limit this. These kind of two challenges that we saw across our customer base. That were like mostly requested features. And then, as I mentioned, you can have multiple Azure OpenAI endpoints. How do you load balance across those? How do you make sure that, as you mentioned, there is a PTU, provision throughput unit, you want to use it at first because you paid upfront for this provisioned capacity, but then you want to fail over to pay-as-you-go instance. How do you solve that? So that's why I introduced Gen AI gateway capabilities in Azure API management to solve those particular challenges. So we introduced a couple of policies, for example, token limit policy, where you can specify that, I want this application to have 1,000 TPM limit on a subscription level, for example, because in Azure API management, you use subscriptions to identify different applications or teams, which is extremely useful in that case. And then cross charges like metrics. You can do that with general login of requests, but we wanted to simplify it. So we introduced a new policy where you just specify application insights, namespace, and then we send those metrics for you to use to application insights.
Yeah.
And then probably you saw that recently we announced the GA for load balancer circuit breaker capabilities, which are extremely useful for this scenario that I described when you have multiple OpenAI endpoints.
As you go one.
Yeah.
I've played around with that. It's quite cool. So I mean, when I hear you describe that scenario there, it's really, in my head, I'm kind of thinking, well, these are all the great features that API management's had for a long time, which really make as an API developer, I'm building my back-end service, and API management makes that easy for people to use it, and there's many features. It sounds very much like it's taking advantage of everything that was in APIM already to make my investment in generative AI usable by internal and external developers. Is there any features you'd like to call out that specifically help that AI use case, beyond some of the things that people might have used for a typical application development?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, what's important to understand here is that OpenAI API is just yet another API. It just has certain specific requirements.
Yeah.
And for example, there is a problem with authentication. As you mentioned, we already have capabilities to build into the product that can help tackle this challenge.
Yeah.
I don't want to share my API key with like tens of different applications because I have only one API key for my OpenAI endpoint. So what I can do instead with existing capabilities in API management, I can configure managed identity authentication to OpenAI, and now I don't need to store this key anymore. I don't need to share this key with anyone anymore, which vastly improves the security of the overall architecture. And then on the specific policies, as we discussed already, like load balancer is not really that specific. It just helps with this multiple OpenAI endpoints challenge. But then this Azure OpenAI token limit policy that we introduced that allows you to set a rate limit not only on the rate per minute basis, but also on token per minute basis. Yeah. So as I mentioned, like we have multiple applications, we assign multiple tokens per minute per application, and that's how you basically solve this specific challenge, which is which comes up with a generative AI application.
Yeah. So what about in terms of the adoption by customers? So I'm guessing you've had like quite an aggressive ramp up of customers starting to leverage this use case. Can you give us an idea of kind of like how many customers you feel like have done this kind of use case already? I mean, are we talking hundreds, thousands? And what do you expect the growth to be like over the coming year? I guess that's going to be really big.
Yeah, so we already saw customers who were using Azure API management even before we introduced these new capabilities, which we introduced during build. So it was like a couple of weeks ago. But we already have hundreds of customers using AIM with Azure OpenAI and other models, frankly. So yeah, I expect like a huge exponential growth because customers are adopting these technologies. We were in a stage where customers were just trying out, like setting up a couple of POCs here and there, but now there's scale and now they need a solution like Azure API management to solve those challenges that we discussed.
And I guess that, with that aggressive adoption of AI, I guess APIM really accelerates the maturity of the type of solution you can build. So I can really see that taking off big time. Yeah. What about in terms of roadmap then over the coming months? What are the kind of things that excite you about what you do and that will help customers in this space?
Yeah, so there are two challenges. Like first is there are a lot of security challenges when it comes to generative AI. There are things like prompt hacking, prompt jailbreaks, and stuff like that. So we were looking at how we can solve this problem for our customers, maybe introducing some policies to, let's say, rewrite the system prompt, maybe override it somehow, or maybe just based on the regular expression to disallow or allow specific words or like kind of keywords or list of keywords in the prompt or in the completion. There's also a lot of challenges for keeping the content safety in place. For example, PII detection, detection of harmful content, if there is some leakage of information from the company. So we're looking at this kind of as a next set of features. That's one thing. And the second thing is currently we're focusing mostly on Azure OpenAI, which makes sense because that's an Azure service. But there are also a lot of different LLMs out there. So we're looking at how we can integrate with those as well, keeping the same capabilities with limiting the token usage, understanding the usage of those LLM models and load balancing across multiple models. So that's something that we are looking at how to support, like a broader range of models.
From what you described from my other chat with Mike, it sounds a bit like there could be a lot of Defender for API management opportunities in there as well about protecting that, because that OpenAI API is going to be quite a key asset for a lot of companies, isn't it? And you're going to want to put really mature security. And do you have any ideas on things you'll be doing in that Defender space? And
Yeah, I'm not sure about Defender space because Defender is kind of specific to APIs, and as I mentioned, there are specific needs when it comes to LLMs. As I mentioned, like content safety, it's very specific to something that is generated by a model or even user-generated content. There's no easy way to check it, so that's why you need to have other models to check the responses from which are coming from LLMs. So yeah, I believe that we will be most likely we'll be integrating with some of the capabilities that already exist in Azure. So yeah.
I guess when I was thinking about that question, it's really there's a question with the content about where's the line of separation between what's really the responsibility of Open AI versus what's the responsibility of APIM, isn't it? So if we pivot for a second then onto AI within API management. So can you tell me about some of the investments the team have been making with things like Copilot to help people build better APIs?
Yeah, so I believe that during last Ignites, there was an introduction of Microsoft Copilot for Azure. This is kind of a broader Copilot for everything which is related to Azure. It was announced as a gated public preview, but I believe right now during build, they announced that it's fully open. So we integrated with this Microsoft Copilot for Azure through what is called skills. So we introduced a couple of skills for Azure APIM management, so that this kind of broader Microsoft Copilot can use. It can then identify that there is a customer or there is a user in the, for example, policy editor in Azure APIM management, and they can ask questions about policies. And we saw that we started with kind of two scenarios. First is we understand that sometimes it's really hard to write a policy to understand what kind of policy should I use for a specific need. So we introduced again a generate policy skill into the Microsoft Copilot for Azure, where you can just open up a chat window and ask, like, for example, Copilot, I want to generate a policy for me to implement a rate limit of 15 requests per second, for example. And then it returns a XML document that you can just copy and paste into the editor. So that's one thing. And second thing is we, over a lot of interactions with customers, we figured out that sometimes it's kind of hard to understand what's already in there in the policy configuration, especially if it's not something that you created or someone from your team created previously and you're trying to understand what's going on there. So we introduced a second skill, which is explain policy. So you can select the policy snippet right into the editor, right-click it and ask Copilot to explain it to you. And then it explains it pretty well in plain English, like what's going on there. And it's not just explaining kind of where kind of the policies are used from documentation, but it also like describes that, oh, you have this named value that is storing this, or there is a validate jot. It looks for this specific claim in the policy to like allow or disallow specific actions.
So I guess like with the policies, because you've got that hierarchy where you've got the root policy and then the API policy, then the operation, I guess that kind of Copilot use case is really going to help you understand sort of like reverse engineer an API somebody else might have built and you can't quite get your head around it. It's
there's certainly a problem like of scopes, because right now we are just focusing on whatever you have in the editor, like right in front of you. But one of the next steps could be like to expand this explain handler to like say like what is the effective policy for considering all of the scopes that I have here for this API. For this.
But what's your thoughts on things you might do in the future with Copilot then, based on the feedback you've had so far?
Yeah, so we definitely have some room for improvement for generate and explain policy handlers or skills from Microsoft Copilot for Azure. So we're collecting feedback constantly. We just, as I mentioned, it went public preview, so we're getting more and more data to understand like how well it works for customers. And then there are a lot of different use cases, honestly. Like we hear a lot of generating specifications or generating SDKs or explaining like some other configurations in Azure APIM management. So yeah, there's a lot of place where we can apply Copilot in the future.
Things like examples and so I think one of the things I'd find quite interesting, if I can give some feedback, would be something like a what if scenario. So if I've got like Copilot, I'm thinking about a change and it knows the API I've got, and I'm like, what if I did this, what would happen? And it can sort of simulate that. I think that, from a developer perspective, the kind of red-green refactor process of making a change, testing it, breaking it, fixing it, you know what I mean? That it's quite a time-consuming process. And if the Copilot can help me what if some of those scenarios would be quite an interesting use case.
Yeah, testing is definitely one of the key scenarios that we hear from customers, and it's not only in the Azure API management kind of portal, but also in the developer portal side. Like as a developer, I want to test this thing, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time writing those tests. Copilot can generate a lot of stuff for me because Copilot already has all of the context that I need to perform.
So if I can ask one more question, Andrei, on just going back to the previous topic a little bit, the customer scenarios. Do you find that the different models that I might be using for AI would affect things in API management that I might do to expose that, or do you find that it kind of becomes very generic in that it doesn't matter too much which model you use, API management works in the same way?
Yeah, we definitely see that the whole kind of industry is going in a direction of kind of unifying the interface to those models. Like for example, if you look at the like Llama or Mistral, they're pretty similar in the like request response structure. And we also see some innovation happening in the Azure AI Studio, where I believe during build as well, they introduced the new inference API, which is you can think about it as a common API for all of the models. So whatever you deploy in Azure AI Studio, whether it's like Llama, Mistral, Cohere, we give you a common API that you can use. And I think there will be a lot of unification like happening going forward.
And I guess from a use case perspective, if I think about scenarios you've seen yourself, is there any particular customer scenario or demo scenario that you found really interesting? You know, where I'm just thinking, like, to give listeners the kind of the idea of what can I do with this technology. We're talking quite low level about some of the models and some of the things that API gives you, but what's one of the interesting customer use cases that you've seen?
Yeah, there are a lot of assistant scenarios like chat assistants, like, hey, I have this database of documents inside my organization. Now I want to train this model or use this RAG pattern that was mentioned here at Integrate to train on these documents and retrieve data from those documents easily for my employees within the organization, for example, or for external customers. There is a question about a product that I'm selling as a company. Now this Copilot-like experiences or chat experience, now they can answer those questions pretty great instead of just having like a call center responding to.
So in that scenario, would APIM's role be, I've got my sort of documents, my data about my processes, OpenAI sits on top, and then API management exposes it, so I can have application developers can write an app that can execute those queries, kind of thing.
Yeah, we're also looking at adding more and more capabilities into GenAI Gateway. For example, this retrieval augmented generation pattern, you have to write everything in code essentially, but you can offload this to the infrastructure layer, in our case Azure API management, to do that instead. And I didn't mention that the policy that we introduced as a preview is semantic caching. For example, there is a regular caching, but there is also a semantic caching where you can save a lot of tokens and a lot of like latency on the request response. That's also typically something that is implemented on the application level, but with Azure API management capability, you now can offload this to Azure API management, and your developers can just focus on writing code for the interface and just kind of general logic for your application, instead of thinking about how should I write this for generative AI use case.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we're just about at time there, Andrei. Thank you very much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed that chat. And it's a space I've only kind of had a chance to dip my toe in a little bit, so it's nice to hear from somebody on the product team telling us about all the features that you've got. We hope you enjoy Integrate this week, and hopefully we can get some future chats with people from the team to delve into these topics a bit more.
Thank you.